Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for the EV Summit series for World EV Day. The panel today is eMobility in US cities, and for World EV Day, this is really an exciting thing. And you know, for me, it's really great to be hosting and moderating the panel today. One of the most important aspects that we see is what can we do to reduce our carbon footprint? And you know, one of the things that we did for our family personally is that we were able to reduce our carbon footprint with our vehicle, buying an electric vehicle, and we happened to reduce that by 90% for our own personal vehicle. But we know that for cities, there's so many challenges going on today. So that's the thing that we want to address today. There's so many things around charging. There's so many things around ownership, what to do with parking, etc. And for that reason, we've got 5 experts today on this panel. One of the things that's really great to know today is that we have people from right around the world attending for World EV Day, and the amount of success that we've had, the amount of support that we've had from other companies and people sending messages saying, you know, this is great. We've really appreciated that. So with that in mind, let's get into the panel today. So the first thing I want to do is introduce our panelists. So firstly, my name is James Carter. I'll be the moderator today. I'm a principal consultant of Vision Mobility, and I'll be leading the proceedings today. The first panelist we have today is Asaf Nagler. He's the Senior Director of Government Relations for ABB. Second panelist is Erica Myers. She is the Principal of Transportation at the Smart Electric Power Alliance, or SEPA. The third person we have today is Sarah Reed, and she's the Program Manager for Public Fleets and Electric Coalition. Then fourth is Mike Salisbury. He's the Transportation Energy Lead at the City and County of Denver in Colorado. And lastly, we have Catherine Kummer, who's the Climate Advisor at Charlotte in North Carolina. So thank you everyone for being here today. We really appreciate it. So the first thing that I wanted to mention today is what to expect from our panel today. Firstly, we're going to have 5 minutes some questions from each panelist, and then straight after that, we're going to have 5 minutes of questions from you, the audience. So please make sure, if you're in the audience today, make sure to hit that Q&A button and ask the panelists some questions as we're going through our discussion today. That would be really good, so that your question can be heard and that we can see what's going on. So first thing I'd like to do today is let's bring up Asaf.
Hi, James.
Hi, how are you, Asaf?
I'm well, how are you?
Good. Look, I'm just going to ask you a question here. Asaf, ABB is one of the largest suppliers of EVSE equipment globally. What sort of partnerships are you seeing with ABB in cities that have helped overcome some of the key problems with EV infrastructure, such as charging for apartments and for street parking and grid-side high-power charging enablement?
Sure, thanks, James, for the question and for the opportunity to be with you and the other panelists, and happy World EV Day. So, you know, ABB approaches city electrification and digitalization from a wide and interconnected lens, from smart buildings to transportation. And I think that's kind of a useful paradigm, because transportation electrification is far from monolithic. You know, in a city, you have a wide landscape, transit bus operators, personal drivers. Some live in apartments, some are in homes, some have dedicated parking, some don't. Of course, you have delivery trucks that may be based outside the city, and then transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft. So each of these segments may have different charging technology needs, and there's really no one-size-fits-all approach. But before getting to your point, I just want to kind of get some scale to the challenge. So a little back of the envelope math here. There are currently about 2 million registered passenger vehicles in New York City, which doesn't include trucks, buses, or any other kind of vehicles. If every one of those cars were electric and plugged in at the same time using a simple level 2 charger, it would create about 13 gigawatts of demand.
That is huge. That is crazy.
Yeah, it's about 13 nuclear power plants.
Wow.
So, of course, in reality, it would happen differently. Every car won't charge at the same time. There might be energy storage or managed charging, but it just gives you a sense of the transformation we're embarking on. And as much as it is massive, it's also going to be distributed, and so that creates some unique challenges. So as I think about transportation electrification in cities, three instructive principles come to mind. First is we need to address every segment of the transportation sector. Second, we have to do it collaboratively. And third, our approach must be flexible enough to evolve with the market and the technology. So to your specific question, one of the segments where we're seeing partnership with cities on eMobility is in bus transit. So transit agencies are the first movers in urban transportation. For the past few years, we've been seeing them purchase a few buses here and there and some chargers. But now that they're getting comfortable with the technology, they're beginning to make larger investments. So that means purchasing buses in large numbers and thinking seriously about how they design and implement charging at scale. So these buses have big batteries, and you gather them into a depot. You need a lot of power, and importantly, you need a lot of power in a very small footprint. Real estate in cities is at a premium. So to meet these challenges, we've designed some systems where you can stack all of the power equipment above the buses in order to save some footprint. And we've also begun installing pantograph chargers that come down from the ceiling of the bus barn and charge each bus automatically as it pulls into the depot. And then you don't have to worry about plugging in the vehicle or any of those sorts of challenges. So, there are a host of other things cities can do as well. Converting their own fleets, EV-ready building codes, setting EV targets. And many cities, including some of the ones on the panel today, are already drafting their own transportation electrification plans. And so I think, again, as we kind of engage in this thinking and this vision, we got to keep these three principles in mind, which are that every transportation segment matters, and they should all get attention. So that's different types of vehicles, from passenger cars to buses and trucks, and different types of drivers, single-family homeowners to apartment dwellers. And equity in the eMobility vision is really important to success. Of course, you can't work on every segment at the same time, but we don't want to artificially leave out certain stakeholders or participants. We have to collaborate, and we're seeing this across cities, which means bringing multiple stakeholders to the table. Manufacturers of cars, infrastructure providers, utilities, fleet owners, and of course drivers and riders, because they're the ones that live it every day. And we really need to evolve with the market. So for example, 10 years ago, no one was thinking about 350 kilowatt charging with liquid cooled cables. No one was thinking about 150 kilowatt pantographs coming down from the ceiling and automatically charging a bus. So we really need to be nimble in our approach to electrification, or we'll unintentionally hamper adoption. I have few examples of that if you like. But cities are dynamic, and they're hotbeds for innovation. So if we really want to innovate and lead, we definitely need to make sure that we address all the market players and participants, that we work together, and that we evolve with the market and with the technology.
Yeah, thanks very much, Asaf. That's really important. We've actually got a couple of questions that have come in. So the first one that we've got in here, we've got Gilbert Castellan. Given the energy power demand in New York City for EVs, would our EV infrastructure require conversion to more nuclear plants? What are your thoughts on that? Or, is this something that's a little bit, on that side of the fence, and, ABB is kind of the bridge in the middle? What are your thoughts?
Sure, ABB is involved in electrification all the way from, the distribution grid all the way to the vehicle. That power demand is theoretical power demand, right? For purposes of conversation, right? So obviously we'd like to see the generation portfolio go towards cleaner sources of electricity. The good news for EVs is that we know how to do that, which is why converting to electrification is so important. The majority of new generating capacity, at least in the US, has been renewable with solar and wind. They've been growing drastically. And so in the carbon emitting generation facilities have been winding down. So I think
Mhm.
the prospect is really good, but we're certainly going to need a mix of technologies in order to get there.
Yeah, thanks, Asaf. The next question we have from Roger Atkins. There's a lot of new charging technologies that are coming up, and one of the ones that I know Roger's quite interested in is has ABB looked at high power wireless chargers, or there's others that are out there, for instance robotic. What has ABB been looking at to source those types of things? Are they available in the US? There's other trials going on around the world. What's the latest technology that you're seeing in chargers?
Certainly, so robotics for sure. ABB is one of the largest maker of robots globally. And so for certain applications, we are working on those type of solutions. Wireless charging is promising. I think as we've learned with all sorts of charging technology, everything has a niche. And I think wireless still has a ways to go. There's no standard around it or interoperability for those. But we're really seeing a lot of growth in the portfolio in chargers from level 2 all the way to high power charging. And I think that's where some of the real innovation is happening, is on that side. We're seeing the ability to pack more and more power into a smaller and smaller footprint. And I think that's really important for cities. As again, you need to have a lot of power for these chargers and footprints at a premium. So that's something that we've certainly seen in our technology portfolio as it's grown, is being able to fit more in a smaller footprint.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Asaf. The next question is from Tony Shorthouse. How realistic is V2G over charging or other wireless charging? What are your thoughts surrounding V2G?
There's been a lot of work on V2G happening, particularly in California, and I certainly think it's promising. The question that we always ask, and I think it's important to ask, is how's the vehicle going to be used? How's it going to operate? And how's the charger going to be used? And for a lot of folks, V2G may not make sense, but for some use cases, it might. For example, if you're on the go and you're having a fast charge session, you're probably not in a situation where you want to be putting power back to the grid, right? You want to be taking power quickly so you can get on your way. In other cases where you might have idle assets like school buses in the summertime, where they have large battery capacity that aren't being used, that might be a great time where you can have some exchange between the vehicles and the grid. So there are a lot of nuances to work through, and we haven't even talked about a number of them. However, it's something that we need to have in the arsenal. But I think the important thing is figuring out, what's the actual use case for this, and how will it be used.
Great. Thanks, Asaf. Thank you very much for those comments, and thank you for your thoughts on these questions today. Right now, we are going to move over to Sarah Reed. And Sarah's the program manager for public fleets and at Electrification Coalition. Welcome today, Sarah. It's so good to have you here today.
Thank you so much, James. I'm really excited to be here.
Excellent. Now, Sarah, we know most governments are suffering from severe budget shortfalls due to the impact of COVID-19. And, I know many fleets will simply try to push out any capital expenditure, just say, can't afford it now, let's push it out. How can we encourage public fleets to actually shift to EVs? We know that there's higher capital costs, but what are the ways that we can go to them and say, hey, look, this is worthwhile. Even though it's a difficult time, let's move forward.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, we really know firsthand the immense challenges that cities are facing right now. We work with over 200 public fleets who are looking to purchase EVs this year and next, and have a really gained a depth of experience of how cities and others across the country are tackling the issues of electrifying their fleets. And just overall, it's been really incredible to see how mayors and cities are leading and leveraging all of the local organizations and cooperations to make change. And I know we'll hear from Catherine and Mike in Denver and Charlotte, who can really give us some of their firsthand experience. But there are a couple things that we at the Electrification Coalition really like to share with fleets and help bring them to the electrification stage. So I think the single biggest thing that a fleet can do is to calculate a total cost of ownership. And so this takes a look at how far a vehicle drives over the year, the local costs of gas and electricity. So it's really exact to where a fleet is, maintenance and vehicle costs. And so, as everybody for the most part knows, that EVs do cost more upfront, but in most cases, they are cheaper over the course of their lifetime if implemented in the right use. And so there are simple online calculation tools that public fleets can use. There's more complex tools that are out there. The Electrification Coalition, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan group focused on facilitating the transition to electric. We can help you. And additionally, cities can also utilize their telematics data. There's software that's out there that can help analyze an actual vehicle mileage and cost and give that exact information to determine if an EV is the right fit. So there's a lot of different levels of going through this total cost of ownership calculation that can really kind of give the data to show the cost savings that are available for electric vehicles. And actually in Cincinnati, we did this with a telematics assessment with 11 vehicles and found that they would save $150,000 in operational costs and see a 17% reduction in average total cost of ownership. So that's an example that really kind of showcases the exciting things that can happen if you do that kind of calculation.
Very cool, Sarah. Just before we go on, I just really want to encourage the audience to send through questions, because I know Sarah's got so much experience here. And one of the things that you just said that really struck me was that $150,000 number, to be able to go to another public fleet and say, hey, you can save 150 grand over X period of time that you have these vehicles. What are fleets saying to that when you come up with these numbers about these savings in total cost of operation?
It's really exciting. It really kind of showcases to all departments across the city where the savings are, and can really just give that confidence in the decision-making process with the sustainability manager, the fleet manager, the procurement folks. So just all across the city, and also gives mayors those numbers that they can really showcase what kind of good changes they're making for their taxpayers. For air quality and money saving and all of those good things. So, it's all very exciting. And I think that having access to that kind of information is really pivotal for cities that are looking to transition.
Totally. I'm sure if you go into those managers and say, look, I have these savings, and they can go to the mayor or to the, I guess the people who are voted for, and, they can show these, what they've done, that's a real winner for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And something else too is just being able to make those numbers very specific to an actual city. So like I said, taking into account, I'm in California, my electricity cost is very high, but so is my gas cost. So like really having just those local metrics as well to highlight the exact example.
Yeah, very cool. This is a question from Patrick McGuinness. Do you see advantages to either carrot or stick approaches when transitioning vehicles, particularly say diesel trucks to electric trucks in ports or specific areas within the city? What do you see in when you're applying that sort of understanding to public fleets? How does that work for you?
Yeah, so this something else that I wanted to point out that kind of relates to this question is something that cities can also do right now in a time of budget shortage is this EV first policy. And so passing policies that support EV adoption, even if they don't have the purchasing power this year, to set them up for success in the future. And I think that kind of relates to the carrot idea. And so as an example, and I know, Denver and Charlotte are great examples of this. And then also in Albuquerque, we just worked to pass an EV first policy for them, which is basically an innocent until proven guilty model for, they have to purchase an EV unless they prove that they need a gas vehicle for, there are uses, generally public safety, a vehicle that needs four-wheel drive, or it goes over, high clearance for a certain kind of terrain. It drives a really, really long distance every day, all of those kinds of metrics that are set that are for the city. And so that really sets the city up for success. And I think within an actual city, it's more about those kinds of policies and kind of less about a carrot and stick approach, because for a public fleet, they really need it to work for them, and the budget is a really big concern. You know, you can't spend more money than you have at the local level. And so in California particularly, you know, there are a lot of rules and regulations about transitioning fleets, but there just is a need to kind of actually make it happen on the local level. And so we're really interested in helping the cities and counties and universities and all kind of public fleets make it realistic for them, because they need the knowledge and the money to do it, or the understanding of how the budget will play out.
Yeah, totally. I have a question again from Tony Shorthouse here. Is there any noticeable anxiety about switching fleets to EV due to charging or power grid infrastructure, or, you know, what are those issues that you see coming up that you know, you regularly have to say, you know, I know this is a concern, but this is how we address it, or this is why we address it. What are those key concerns that public fleets come to you with?
Yep. And another kind of cool thing about the project that I manage, the Climate Mayor's EV Purchasing Collaborative, is that we work with these 200 plus fleets. And so we have a really good idea of what challenges others are facing, and can facilitate peer exchanges that really kind of help fleet manager to fleet manager, or whoever it might be, discuss those challenges and understand, you know, from like a trusted peer, in addition to someone like the Electrification Coalition. And so charging infrastructure, you know, that is definitely a big challenge. And that's one that's just showcasing what others have done. You know, I know in Sacramento, they use the savings from their EVs to fund their charging infrastructure. So just knowing those kinds of creative solutions around the costs of charging, basic education around charging infrastructure, and just range anxiety about really looking at how far a vehicle drives, and just making sure everybody that and employees that will be driving understand, you know, that they really will be okay, and making sure that you're putting the right vehicle, as I said, in the right use case, so that everybody is in a position to be successful. Another one too is education for staff, you know, mechanics. That's another big concern that usually comes up with fleet managers, and that's something where manufacturers of the vehicles actually offer training. There's a lot of community college coursework, especially in California, that is now available to mechanics. So that's just kind of, we know where a lot of these resources are to help solve some of these, you know, initial concerns that fleet managers have that haven't ever even driven an EV or thought about how to put them in their fleet. So.
Right, amazing. We've got one quick question before we finish up and move on. Despite the lower costs, this is from Felix Evans, despite the lower costs of TCO and electric school buses and 500,000 school buses in the US, the upfront cost can be prohibitively expensive. Why is this the case, and how can we accelerate the electrification of school buses? Now, I know we've covered some of this, but is there something in particular in school buses that you've been seeing that's really important for public fleets to understand?
I think with school buses, you know, the biggest thing right now from my perspective, and interested to hear what other panelists kind of know about this, because I really do mostly work on the light duty side, but a lot of the funding for that comes from, you know, VW settlement or other state programs that might be out there. And so a lot of school districts don't have the money, because an electric school bus is significantly more expensive than a diesel school bus. And so finding those opportunities that are out there right now, and understanding how to apply for that funding and implementing the technology is really kind of the most important thing. The collaborative will actually be adding some additional school bus vendors that will help bring the cost down a little bit through the cooperative purchasing mechanism of the program. But you know, it's definitely a newer field, and one that is very expensive. And so there's a couple examples out there, and, you know, it's a really exciting space because, you know, that really impacts air quality, and especially for school age children. So it's very exciting, but yes, definitely challenges.
Definitely, Sarah. It is such an exciting space, and I think with public fleets looking to get on board more and more, to me it also is ability to demonstrate leadership of cities, and I think to me that's one of the most exciting things in the space for is public fleets initiatives so far. So thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate your time today, and it's so good for you to share your thoughts about public fleets with electric vehicles. Thank you. So I would like to introduce Mike Salisbury. Now, Mike is the Transportation Energy Lead in the City and County of Denver, Colorado. Now, Mike has done a whole bunch of different EV projects through Denver and Colorado, and it's really great to have his experience here today to see some of the actual specifics of what he's been able to do and what he's been able to see. Welcome, Mike.
Hello, thank you. Glad to be here.
Great to have you here today as well. So first question that we are going to have for you today. We know vehicle electrification of all types is absolutely critical to reducing our carbon emissions. However, there's more to it than that, because it's about clean air for cities as well, which, we saw this during COVID times as cities, their air pollution almost just went away. How can cities take advantage of this situation, something everyone's noticed, being clean air, and use this to accelerate the shift towards electric vehicles?
Yeah, thanks, James. Great question. I think, really clean air is absolutely fundamental. So it's what we're trying to accomplish. And air quality has this, for better or worse, has the benefit of being a much more tangible and visible on a daily basis than issues like climate. So you said, like, this spring in March and April, we had this really powerful moment where we had this incredibly clean air. And I think it really helped give people a vision of what a clean transportation, clean energy future can look like. But then here in Colorado, like in so many other parts of the Western United States, we've been having a terrible wildfire season, which is of course exacerbated by climate change. So we have this like really recent stark contrast between this really clean air in the spring, and then 2 days ago, like I couldn't see the mountains in Denver. Like they're because of wildfire smoke and then general haze. So it's this really interesting, clear contrast that we can use to kind of sell or talk to the public about the benefits of clean transportation and electric vehicles. But it does take more than electrification kind of mentioned. So I know in Denver and a lot of cities, we focus a lot on mobility first. So, walking, biking, transit, the cleanest mile is the one not driven. So especially if it's a individually owned, single occupancy gasoline vehicle. But the reality is we have this incredibly short time frame to reduce our carbon emissions. So we need to, both drastically reduce driving and miles driven, but also just significantly ramp up EV adoption. Sarah was, kind of talking about the budgetary challenges, and unfortunately, Denver's in that same boat. So we're trying to think about how we can be creative. How do we keep on moving forward with EV adoption in the city in these kind of budget times? And so we're looking, for example, to do more partnerships with the private sector. So having a third party come in and site stations on city properties. The city might not have capital dollars to contribute to install more stations, but they can provide city properties which can be great destinations for the public to go. We're also trying to partner as much as possible with our electric utility, Xcel Energy. They're developing a whole bunch of great programs around supporting charging stations. So we're trying to work with them to reduce our cost and make sure our capital dollars that we do have stretch further. But it's a tricky time. So I think with trying to figure out what the new normal is in transportation in this kind of COVID world. And one thing we try to think about is trying to make sure that as these transportation needs shift and are changing, that we're trying to meet people where they are for their mobility needs. So it's interesting. We've seen a lot of challenges in that people are less likely, or lots of less transit ridership. So that's a big challenge. So we're also trying to think, are there other mobility opportunities? So things like electric bicycles have seen a big uptick over the last few months. Also, even electric car sharing has been on the rise. We're working on that in Denver. So I don't know, there's lots of different pieces, but yeah, we're really trying to do everything we possibly can to keep on pushing forward, keep all our programs running, and just trying to be creative and flexible as we can so we can kind of get to that cleaner air future that we briefly got to experience this spring.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Mike. Before I go on, I do want to ask the audience, please make sure you submit your questions for Mike. There's so much knowledge that he has. So please throw some questions down on the Q&A and let's ask, let's tap into this deep knowledge. So the first question I'd like to ask here is, does Denver actually have some unique challenges to EV adoption? Perhaps it's cold, perhaps it's, elevation. Are any of them challenges that you see?
I think, and I don't know that it's unique to Denver, lots of cities have the same challenges, but the first question I get a lot of the time when I talk to someone about electric vehicles is they always want to know, can I go to the mountains and back in my EV? That's for people living in the Denver metro area, going to the ski resorts in the winter, going hiking and camping in the summer. Like, that's why so many people move to this area. So that's, I think, certainly not a unique challenge, but certainly that's one of the first questions we get from people who want to buy an EV. They're like, well, I'd like an EV, but can it take me to, the ski resorts in the winter, and can I get back? And so making sure, we are partnering as much as possible with those destinations outside of the city. So people obviously don't stop driving when they hit the Denver city limits, but making sure that we, as much as possible, are making sure we're working with state and private sector to put charging stations along highways, at destinations in the mountains where people go, so that they kind of have that assurance that they can make kind of the most important trip for Denverites and people living in the area, that most important trip, making sure they have the confidence to make that kind of like fundamental trip of their lives is really key to EV adoption in Denver, I would say.
Actually, one thing I did see a little while ago on YouTube was a YouTube channel that's based in Denver with their EV. They actually started at the mountain, and then by the time they got back into Denver, they had more range than when they started because they went down the mountain. So I thought that was pretty cool. So now, next question: do you see any political divide in EV adoption? Obviously you have to work with both sides of politics. When you're spreading the message of EVs, how do you appeal to different sides?
I think, Sarah, I think was hitting on some of there's so many different benefits to electric vehicles. My work focuses mostly on climate. So that, for better or worse, has become a kind of a political issue.
Right.
For worse, it is. But as I was saying, like the clean air, we look at, say, polling in the city of Denver, environmental issues that are important to people. Clean air is, always looks a lot better. More people say they are really concerned about air quality. So we definitely broadcast that message a lot, the clean air benefits of electrification, because I think that message resonates to just about everyone. Everyone can look out and see the days in Denver in the summer where you can't see the mountains. And they know that's not good. I'm breathing that. My children are breathing that. So, that's obviously a message we use a lot and talk about. And I think then, the economics are always helpful too. I mean, I think there's lots of different messages. And I think we do, while a lot of people in Denver are very concerned about environmental issues and climate, we recognize it's not everybody. And so we kind of try to push all those messages out there, and we do kind of target that message. If we know we're going to talk to different groups of people, we might, emphasize one message more than the other one.
Totally. Now, question here from Jim Pegg. Has Denver looked at supporting the electrification of contractor fleets by providing incentives such as more points on an RFP, such as, say, submitting for garbage trucks or other city tenders that might happen? What happens in that process?
So I think that's something, it's interesting. We're looking right now at a kind of a micro transit project for next year in the city, and we're trying to figure out how can we make sure that project, as much as possible, is electrified. So that's something we're actually working on. It's funny you kind of asked that. We're working on an RFP right now to think, okay, how can we put a system in there to incentivize whoever that operator is going to be to electrify? It might not be the only, it's not the deciding factor, but it's part of the equation when we're trying to provide these contracts and looking at, can we encourage people who are bidding for city work and things like that to use electric vehicles. And then, I think our role also in that is to try to support them by making sure that there is, more infrastructure available for charging and help them get through, their own process. If they're a private company, how can they get access to charging? And there's grants already available in Colorado, but we also work to help, your average company doesn't know how the grants work. So we always are very interested in partnering with them and like helping them through the grant process so they can, get the incentives that are out there already.
Very cool. Well, Mike, thank you very much for all your thoughts, and we really appreciate your time today to tell us a little bit about what Denver's doing. So thanks again very much, and appreciate your time. So our next panelist today is Catherine Coomer, who's the climate advisor for Charlotte of North Carolina. So thank you very much for joining us today, Catherine.
Yes, hello, James. Thanks for having me. Happy World EV Day.
Happy World EV Day indeed. Thank you. So I have a question for you here. You mentioned that cities have the opportunity to influence and inspire the cities in the move towards vehicle electrification. What are the most inspiring programs that you've seen cities implement, and how have you seen people respond to it?
Yeah, and James, it's this opportunity that was actually the key driver when accepting this new role with the Bloomberg Philanthropies American Cities Climate Challenge and the City of Charlotte. So just to give you a little bit of background, the Climate Challenge is 25 cities that are doing just that, influencing and inspiring. Denver and Charlotte actually being two of those that you were hearing about today. So I'll certainly get to your core question on inspiring programs. I've got to acknowledge that first, that internal action is a key step to getting to these programs. You heard Mike and Sarah both talk about policies and budgets, and these cities in the Climate Challenge are quite frankly leading by example. And I believe that is one of, if not the most important things you can do as a city is, show your citizens that you are stepping up to the plate and truly working to do, what you've said you're going to do, what you've committed to do. That's step one. And then step two is, meeting your communities where they are and then empowering them through education on these new technologies, because let's be honest, we are all continuing to educate ourselves on these new technologies hourly as they continue to evolve hourly. And we make this just crazy critical transition to eMobility. But I wanted to share a couple of examples of, that step one that I mentioned that specifically are examples from right here within the city of Charlotte, and those tie back specifically to policy and budget. So, the city of Charlotte put their Strategic Energy Action Plan, which is also referred to affectionately as the CAP, into place in December of 2018 after it was a unanimous vote by City Council, which was really awesome. And this plan calls for city fleets and facilities to be powered 100% by zero carbon sources by 2030, so 10 years. So earlier this year, in the heat of the COVID crisis, the social unrest that we had here in Charlotte, as I know many cities had in their backyards as well, storms and earthquakes, because yes, we had an earthquake in North Carolina, first time ever, or at least in 100 years, I think, something along those lines. The city, under the city manager, Marcus Jones's leadership, they signed into action its first ever AVL policy and its first ever sustainable and resilient fleet policy. So very similar to what Sarah was talking about, like in these policies, it's mandating that departments transition to electric using a TCO that we actually developed with the city to be able to justify why you're going to have that upfront expense be more expensive than your traditional fossil fuel powered vehicle. These two policies, they're setting the foundation for city fleets, and specifically the city of Charlotte's fleet, to make that transition to 100% electric over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
The city also approved a budget, again, in the heat of the COVID crisis and all of the other things going on, of $3 million for sustainable infrastructure. $1 million of that is going specifically to the purchase and installation of 38 additional level 2 charging stations, which is going to take the total number of city charging stations to 90. And the city also approved an additional $740,000, again, after utilizing that total cost of ownership to justify the investment, to transition 27 gasoline fueled vehicles to 87, which will leave the city of Charlotte with a total of 42 by next year. But I can't leave out the city's transit agency, who is just beginning and embarking on their first battery electric bus journey with the piloting of 3 different OEM bus models to occur. And this is really important on opportunity corridors soon, because I think the other important thing to highlight, and what are some of the most inspiring programs, are programs that connect equity to the environment. But to finally get to answer your question, one of the most inspiring programs I've seen to date, and of course it happened in my Queen City, the city of Charlotte put on a quote unquote electric avenue last year as part of National Drive Electric Week. They partnered with their local utility, who is Duke Energy, various OEMs, and most importantly, their residents, to put on an EV education event on one of their main streets in Uptown that's typically only open for vehicle traffic. The event generated over 300 folks in attendance in just a partial day. And that was folks that were coming out and they wanted to learn about these EVs that were taking up the street, where traditionally they'd see fossil fuel vehicles going up and down throughout the day. But even more interestingly enough, because our hope is to continue these events in our post-COVID world where we can be in person again, we did surveying. So we had 85 different in-person surveys. And these surveys, these engagements allowed us to better understand our community's thoughts and concerns. There are barriers per se, or roadblocks on why they're not purchasing EVs, or why they are purchasing EVs. So again, it's really an exciting opportunity to be able to work in cities because of the ability cities have to inspire and influence. And it's getting your house right first, right? It's the internal piece, which a lot of our cities within the challenge are doing from a policy and a budget and an ordinance standpoint. And then it's going out and it's educating the community, and most importantly, meeting your community where they are, and just empowering them to know that they can do these things too. They can make these switches too, and here's how.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you very much, Catherine. We have some questions. Look, if any of the audience does have some questions for Catherine here, I think some of the things that she's saying are extremely inspiring, and because it really gets people to resonate with what the message that electric vehicles is all about. So the first question I have today here for you, do you think it's achievable that, perhaps 10 years is an achievable transition timeline to 100% electric? Or do you think that's, it's going to take longer than that? Or, what are you thinking? Maybe that's for public vehicles, citizens' vehicles may take longer. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, the city of Charlotte made this goal knowing that the technology would be evolving, like I said before, on an hourly, daily basis. So, speaking specifically to our city, we fully feel that in 10 years we can be 100%, and we're going to operate in that capacity, right? We've committed to that, and we are going to go all in. And with Mayor Vi Lyles, and City Manager Jones, with their leadership, and the other leadership within the city standing behind these public goals that have been made, I think it's very capable. It's very realistic.
Now, I know you mentioned some of the public events that you've had in Charlotte, and what is the core message, or how have people really been able to grab that, I guess, in turn themselves? What are they saying to you about how they're being inspired?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Spending time with the community members, just going back to reference the event that happened last fall in Uptown Charlotte, the look on their faces when you explain to them how far you actually can go on one charge, or how safe the very back of a Tesla is, even though one may not think it's as safe as it could be. You know, just the light bulbs moments where they're looking at the cost comparisons and where they're thinking for the first time about total cost of ownership and what they'll pay all in, but more specifically, what they'll save. And then also what they'll save as it relates to carbon and greenhouse gas reductions, like providing equivalencies and making those equivalencies ingestible for someone who may not think about carbon and greenhouse gases and CO2 equivalent on a daily basis, like I tend to do on occasion. Just making it, again, meeting these folks where they are and really providing them the opportunity to learn more, because they'll listen. They're ready to listen, and they've told us they want more, they want to listen.
So here's a question. I know when I talk to my kids and their friends, that there's some resonance about electric vehicles that really resonates with them. Can you see what, as the last question today, what have you seen with kids and how do they relate to that?
Oh my gosh, James, this is probably because you heard my kids on the last time we had a prep call. You know, I have some familiarity with kids. And I, of course, am going to reference my 9-year-old son, who just yesterday was in the back seat, and we drove by a fossil fuel vehicle. And he said, "Mom, why are these cars not electric yet?" And I said, "Buddy, well, you know, they just are, I don't know, Will." And he said, "Well, that's just not a good answer. Like, you should know the answer to this, and they should be electric vehicles." So with that, I will say that generation, they are watching us, and they are eager, and they want to learn too. So I would say not only is it an opportunity for cities to inspire and influence, but you know, it's also a responsibility. But I would say it's a responsibility of all of us to ensure that they have the life that they deserve in the future.
Absolutely, and I think that's what it's all about, and it's really great to see, you know, both kids and adults being inspired. So thank you so much today, Catherine. We're really happy to hear about some of the really important things that Charlotte has done and is doing, and we really wish you well in contributing to the future in Charlotte in that way. So thank you. So our next guest today is Erica Myers. Welcome today, Erica. It's just wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's good to see you again. Now, we have a question here for you. You said that electrification is the opportunity of the century for utilities. What are the ways that you've seen utilities in cities position themselves to take best advantage of this coming market growth? Now, before I get to your answer, I just want to make sure for the audience out there to make sure that you're asking questions for Erica. She's very much an expert here, so I'd please send them in to us. So thank you, Erica.
Well, thank you so much, James, and I'm really pleased to be part of the World EV Day. I think this is such an exciting opportunity for all of us to share the love that we mutually feel for electric technology. I personally, this last weekend, took the plunge. I sold my second gas car, and now we only drive all electric. And I'm really excited about that. It's been something 3 years in the making. And, you know, it took a lot of time to convince my spouse that this was a good thing, but we eventually got there. And so, you know, I see this as the most exciting period in transportation, and the next decade is going to be really remarkable. Utilities we see as emerging industry leaders, and in 3 ways we think that they play a very pivotal role in the future of transportation electrification. First, as a trusted energy advisor. Second, they have to think about being the future fuel providers, so making sure that the grid is ready for all of these new vehicles. And then third, we see them as a co-investor in the future of EV charging infrastructure. So drilling in a little bit more into these 3 points. First, as it relates to the trusted energy advisor, a lot of people typically go first to their utility if they're going to be doing anything related to electricity, right? So making sure that their customers have the information, the tools that they need to make smart purchasing decisions. So we see within cities, utilities taking on that role of guidance for transit agencies, government fleets, as they're converting their fleets over, educating them on everything from rates, demand charges, specifically, for example, time of use rates, how much it's going to cost to interconnect that new charging load, how that will impact their bills ultimately. Second, we see utilities providing advice for large corporations on things like workplace charging and sustainable energy, also for multi-unit dwellings or other large complexes of that nature, making sure that they understand what that impact will be for them and where they can potentially site the chargers to minimize the cost for integration. Third, we also see utilities incentivizing individuals through either direct rebates for things like chargers or even the vehicles, and providing that kind of additional catapult to make them, see the opportunity and switch. As it relates to grid readiness, we see, similar to what we've seen now with the oil industry, you got to make sure that the fuel is there, it's reliable, it's affordable, and in the case of electricity, that it is clean energy. And there are huge opportunities in terms of the load growth. The projections showed that by 2030, here in the United States, we'll see roughly 11% annual increase in electricity consumption. But it's really critical that we take into account distribution and transmission planning to make sure we have access to that energy, especially in cities which are typically urban and the infrastructure is underground. It's going to be more expensive to upgrade those systems. So we are preparing well in advance. So making sure the forecasts are correct, and that's going to rely a lot on lots of different people participating and providing that information to utilities to make sure they have that access. And then second, we're going to need to figure out a way to minimize on-peak charging. For those who aren't familiar with the term peak load, that's essentially roughly 100 hours a day when everybody has all their electricity devices turned on, and that's what we typically make our grid system prepared for. So we are preparing the grid for those 100 hours a year. We want to make sure that people aren't charging during those 100 hours a year. So giving them incentives to shift their charging load to off-peak times, let's say mostly at night, or maybe during the day when we're starting to see more and more solar hitting the system. So giving some incentivization and guidance to consumers about those charging opportunities. As it relates to the third piece on co-investment, the Brattle Group recently published a report in June that showed here in the US, by 2030, we're going to need somewhere between $75 to $125 billion of investment to accommodate 20 million EVs by 2030. That's a huge amount of investment. We see utilities as coming to the table and providing some of that funding. So far, utility investments that have been approved by regulators are equivalent to about $750 million. So that infrastructure can be made available today for communities and cities for things like multi-unit dwellings and public charging infrastructure, workplace charging. And there are more proposals out there that are being considered. But we do see that utilities will play a major role in helping the industry get the infrastructure that we absolutely need to give people the confidence to make the switch to electric, that they won't get stranded and that they have access to reliable and affordable power.
So thank you very much, Erica. We do have some questions. The first one today is from Audrey Wang at Gosselin. How do we make passenger EVs more accessible, or should we be focusing on the transforming the paradigm for people moving among cities, increasing public transportation accessibility? Obviously there's this dilemma going on, or, what is the future, and I know your work has been with electric vehicles, but, also in needing to encourage transit as well. What are your thoughts?
SEPA has called our focus on this pathway transportation electrification for a reason. We see it's not just light duty, it's medium and heavy duty, on-road and off-road. We also see opportunities with marine, so boats, and also air. So how can we eventually switch our planes to run on electric? And SEPA's vision is that we will have completely decarbonized our transportation sector by 2050. So in the next 30 years, everything needs to shift to cleaner forms of fuel, not just in light duty passenger vehicles. So I completely concur that this is not something that happens one at a time. It all needs to happen in parallel, which from a utility perspective makes things a lot more complicated. But also for me and for many others in the industry, it's very exciting.
Absolutely, and it's very exciting for me too. Question from Patrick McGuinness here. Some monopoly utilities, particularly in the South, actively fight against distributed electric generation. How can this be worked through and reversed? You know, obviously there's politics involved here. You know, obviously there's other behind the scenes things, but, you know, encouraging electric vehicles and encouraging utilities to work through this. What have you been seeing?
So, as it relates to conflicts locally, I have a very strong feeling a lot of these conflicts come from fear. The fear that I won't have a job in 5 years or 10 years in my industry. And so where I think we need to spend more time focused on as an industry more broadly is the opportunities to transition people who are working in a fossil industry into an electric vehicle industry. And we absolutely think that there are parallels between the different job types and making sure that we have a just transition for those fossil fuel workers and give them the job training opportunities to move into these new market segments. So I think the fear of it is something that's there and certainly present, and that we all need to work together in this transition and become change agents, as well as supporting our fellow Americans in this transition. And as it relates to utilities, you know, and the role of utilities and the broader industry, I think first and foremost, education and information is something we all need to take seriously, making sure that the information is transparent, it's publicly available, it's accessible for everyone, and that it's translated in a way that's not industry jargon, but that most people can understand.
Yeah, no, thanks, Erica. I think you really keyed on a key point there, and that's the concept of fear and what people think in this transition, and helping people to overcome that fear to me is really key. And so thank you again, Erica. Really appreciate you having us, you coming along to our panel for World EV Day today. So, but please stick around. We've got some questions for everyone between each other of the panelists. So we're going to have a question now. Catherine has a question for Asaph. So if we can have both of these people up, that would be really terrific. So while we're there, I'm going to read this question for Asaph. Can Asaph talk to us about how, if ABB is working with local utilities, specifically around infrastructure at scale, and how ABB is working to prioritize equity?
Certainly, you know, ABB works very closely with our utility partners, and we provide electrical equipment beyond just the charger going all the way to the distribution system. And so we work with them as they kind of think through the challenges that they have for, you know, bringing electricity and electric vehicle charging to all aspects of the community. You know, I think the area where we see the most impact from an equity perspective these days really is in transit. It's kind of the best way to reach folks that don't have vehicles, that live in some other communities where you have significant local pollution from the transportation sector. You see that really having an impact in the transit space, and utilities are very much engaged with the transit agencies and with the infrastructure providers focusing there. The other area we're actually seeing a lot that I think impacts equity is in the port sector, which is slightly different from the service transit space, but ports are typically very poor quality, low air quality areas, and there's massive opportunity for electrifying ports. ABB has been doing it for decades. but we're also seeing more and more of it happen now for the vehicles that operate in port, moving the cargo out on drayage, and a lot of programs are happening there to electrify those vehicles. Then also actually the ships themselves. So we're electrifying ferries throughout the US and the world, and other forms of transit too. So, I think those areas are kind of where it's starting from the equity perspective, but I do think we actually have a long way to go, particularly addressing multi-unit dwellings and some of the other areas where there is an imbalance.
Yeah, excellent, Asaf. Really appreciate that. The next question I have is Sarah from Mike Salisbury. Would be good to know about the value of having an internal champion within the city. Mike, what are your thoughts on having a champion within the city that promotes electric vehicles?
I think it's absolutely critical. I think having champions, I guess I am the EV champion in some ways, and that's super helpful. I'm lucky that I get just to work on EVs with my city work, but it's critical to have champions at all across the city. And I think that's part of what it's been great working Denver as an American Climate Cities Challenge city like Charlotte. And so we've had some support from them. And it's really about building up champions across city departments. So it's not just me in my Office of Climate and Sustainability talking about EVs. It's someone in our transportation department, someone in our general services department, people in our fleet program, and then on up to different elected officials. I think obviously having them be really engaged and excited about electric vehicles is absolutely fundamental, because at the end of the day, no one does anything because Mike Salisbury tells them to do something. I rely on those relationships I build with other EV champions, but also getting our elected officials who are really at the head of this to also be excited and to really show leadership and encourage other people across the city to, do more with electrification.
Very cool, thank you. Now, Sarah has a question for Catherine here on advice that she would give to cities starting out. Sarah, can you read that out for Catherine?
Yes, I'm just always interested, Catherine. You guys have done so much, and you're not a San Francisco or a New York, and so would just like to hear what advice you'd give to a city that's just getting started down this path to their fleet electrification or broader climate goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you made that point, because a lot of times when we have conversations with other cities, specifically cities on the West Coast, they often have that moment of, wow, what? 90 charging stations? You have a policy in place too? It's, the jaw drops a little bit, and they can't believe that, I'm not going to say a small city, because it's definitely not, with 800,000 plus moving on a regular basis. But the Queen City is growing, and its electrification efforts are growing. And so the advice I would give to cities that are starting to build their program and start their program is, you got to make your first step. Make your first step. Make your first move. It could be a small move. It could be a huge move. But move. Don't just talk. And talking is good, don't get me wrong, but you have to move. There has to be action. And until you take that first step, you won't know and you won't do. So that would be my greatest advice.
Thank you, Catherine. And this time I have, this question is from Asaf to Erica, and it's surrounding the impact of COVID on electric utility investment in transportation. Asaf, can you ask this question to Erica, please?
Sure, Erica, I was wondering if you've seen any impact at all from COVID on utility investment in transportation electrification.
Yeah, so I've had the privilege of talking to a lot of utilities in the past couple of months, and the trend shows that there was a slowdown in utility program uptake and enrollment for the first part of the spring into the summer, but fortunately, most of those programs are continuing to move forward and making progress. With the exception of workplace charging, I don't think that's a surprise for anyone here on the phone. The workplace charging programs have definitely had an impact. And then similarly, any programs that involve the utility coming out specifically and installing infrastructure, those programs have had an impact also. Because I think of concerns about, you know, proximity to contractors and things like that. We have seen though that public infrastructure, that we saw a slowdown in charging, that has picked up through the summer. So fortunately, some of those public charging investments are being utilized at a higher rate again. So I'd say things are moving ahead. Utilities are still putting together their regulatory filings and working with their boards to get investments approved. That has not slowed. So I'm feeling very optimistic.
Thank you, Erica. Much appreciated. Now, Erica, if you can remain on, I know you've got a question for Mike here, and I know it's a similar question, just building on from what you've said. If you can read that out for Mike.
Yeah. So hey, Mike, I'm curious to know if you guys have seen any impact in passenger light duty vehicle sales for EVs, because I know that Colorado is really leading the way in new vehicle sales nationally. I'm just curious to see how consumers in your region have responded.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's an interesting one. I think that it's we've been seeing, obviously when COVID first happened, there's a pretty big dip in all vehicle sales. I know that Colorado is dramatically different than the rest of the country in that sense. We did kind of see that EVs kind of at least maintain their kind of normal sales percentage that they had been at over that time. But we have seen, I think, it start to do as in the last couple of months as people have started buying vehicles again. We have seen EV sales kind of continue to go in a positive direction. I think we're just kind of digging out from the hole where people weren't buying vehicles for a long time. But I think we're doing okay. Still need to be doing more to meet our targets. But I think it's moving in the right direction in Colorado as far as people ramping back up again.
Very cool. Thanks, Mike. Now, we've got Sarah. I know you've got another question for Erica here. How can EVs be used as grid assets during power shutoffs? So I think I just asked your question, so sorry, Sarah, but so tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think that all of us are thinking about how can we take advantage of this like 60 kilowatt battery that's sitting in my car right now during all these shutoffs that we're hearing about in California and elsewhere as it relates to recent weather conditions. And I think that's a big, really important question. I've worked on vehicle grid integration topics as kind of my main area of focus for the last 3 years. And it's something that I feel really personally passionate about. I think that everyone who cares about EVs should also care about EV load management. That's how I see the world. I think we want to have this new technology, but we want it without any of the consequences, right? We don't want more fossil fuel plants built as a result of new EVs. And so we think of rates and managed charging, which is the unidirectional signals to delay charge or start charge depending on the amount of clean energy in the system, as the first steps to enabling what we think is a really robust future for EV charging more broadly. But I think added on to that, how can we take advantage of this battery storage, which, believe it or not, there's more storage in the Nissan Leaf population here in the United States than there is collectively across all of the stationary battery storage units in the US. There's more power storage in those Nissan Leafs. So if we could leverage those Nissan Leafs, which today are bidirectionally capable through the CHAdeMO, if we could leverage those in some sort of really unique way for utility programs or for wholesale power markets, what could that do for increasing the robustness and reliability of our grid? And the problem is that we haven't really figured out a way to access those chargers. We don't have interconnection policies. We don't have export tariffs. The net energy metering rules and regulations aren't going to be enough of an incentive to get somebody to export power into the grid. So there's a lot of things that we need to do between now and then. But it's an exciting time. Like I keep saying over and over again, I mean, I love problems. You love problems, James. We can find problems and solutions together.
Yeah, that's it, Erica. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Now, I have a question. Mike has a question for Catherine about Duke Energy. So, Mike, can you read that question out for Catherine? Thank you, Erica.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to, Catherine, if you could just kind of elaborate more. You briefly mentioned a pilot you're doing with Duke Energy and talk about opportunity corridors. I was wondering if you could just talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the City of Charlotte applied for the FTA's Low-No grant in 2019. We're unsuccessful in receiving funding in that year, but like the little engine that could applied again this year with a 50% match. So the city was awarded $3.7 million with, again, a $3.7 million match, which was significantly higher than what they had done in 2019. However, what they also did this year that they did not do in 2019 was name a private procurement partner. And I'm not sure that I've heard of any other cities listing a utility as that private procurement partner, but Duke Energy has been publicly named and was written in the grant application as the procurement partner. And what the plan for Duke Energy is to actually procure 3 different OEM buses. So to be determined on what the OEMs are, but the hope and the goal is to be able to test those 6 buses, the 3 different manufacturers, on an identified opportunity corridor, which is where we need clean air the most, between our uptown area and the Charlotte Douglas International Airport, which actually if they have not received their buses, they're getting their electric buses pretty soon here. So.
Very cool. Thank you, Catherine. I know, Catherine, while you're here, you've got a question for Mike about EVSE installations in low-income communities and ride sharing and connected things. Please ask Mike those.
Yes, I have read enough to be dangerous, Mike, and would love to learn more from you on how Denver is using that CARES funding to put EVSE infrastructure in low-income communities, excuse me.
Sure. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, we were really excited. We applied, and my office in the city applied, and through the city of Denver, we got some funding through the Federal CARES Act to implement an expansion of an electric car sharing program in the city of Denver, focused on under-resourced communities. These are, looking places where we have different equity maps of the city that are kind of under-resourced, don't have great transportation options. So what we're trying to do is we're working with a local nonprofit car sharing company that's really excited about electrifying their fleet of vehicles. And we are going in and putting in some stations and then helping them purchase the electric car share vehicle. So it's going to be going into 5 different communities in the city of Denver. And we're in the stretch of moving extremely quickly. For anyone who is familiar with lots of city governments, doing a project like this in like 4 months' time is kind of nuts, but it's kind of fun and interesting. And as you were saying, Erica, just give us problems and we'll find ways to get around them quickly. But it's a really exciting program, and it gets to the idea of like trying to figure out how we improve mobility for all of Denver residents and really focus on supporting people who don't have as many transportation options, who don't own their own individual vehicle, and also who might be a little hesitant to be getting back onto transit in this kind of COVID world we're in. So it's a super exciting project, and we're really, looking forward to actually getting them implemented by the end of the year. Fingers crossed.
Thank you very much, Mike. I really appreciate that. That's some great news there from Denver. Now, I know Erica has a question for Asaf on high-power charging. Erica.
Asaf, so I know you guys are kind of the masters of the future of high-power charging, and I'm really curious what ABB sees as the next thing in fast charging, and especially for medium and heavy-duty vehicles.
Yeah, thanks, Erica. One of the areas that I think there's a lot of opportunity that we're working on for this space is modularity and scalability. And this goes beyond just the physical charger itself, but it's all the gear that comes with it to make high power charging happen. And so we are developing and deploying more and more modular solutions where you can put the transformers, the switchgear, the distribution controls, everything in a box or on a skid or in a container. And in some cases, you can integrate battery energy storage or whatever other kind of flexible equipment you need in there, and to make it small and modular. Because what we're seeing now is more and more with these trucks, obviously they have high power demand, limited space, and you need ease of installation to keep costs down. And so with these more modular solutions in a smaller footprint, you're able to achieve that, and you're able to really kind of expand the view of what a charger means. It's not just about the charger, but it's about that whole value chain from the charger back to the grid. And if you're able to do it right, you can also obviate the need for other sort of grid investments that the utility might have to make, so that you can, again, make it cheaper to install, faster to install, and really deliver that value to owners and operators.
Thank you, Asaf. That's really much appreciated. Now, one thing, I'm going to put you all on the spot. I want each of you to give like a very brief 1 second, a few words or one sentence summary of what you think, the future of the cities is with electric vehicles. And I'm going to start with you, Asaf.
I think the future is bright, and I think the future is going to be diverse, just like the cities are. We're going to see a diverse set of solutions to the diverse set of drivers and the community that's out there. And I think we'll get there if we can find a way to unleash that innovation and those multiple solutions for all the different players out there.
Very cool. Thank you, Asaf. Erica, what's your thoughts? Just really briefly to wrap up.
So I see the future of EVs as evolving alongside autonomous vehicles. So we can deploy electric vehicles to service, let's say, constrained feeders or other places in emergency situations. That would be a way that we can continue to leverage these transportation investments, as well as make society at large better and a more wonderful place to live, as we see more and more people moving towards car sharing and then out of their own personal vehicles.
Thank you, Erica. Much appreciated. Sarah, what are your closing thoughts?
Yes, I totally agree with Asaf on the innovation and the creative solutions piece. That's really important. And then also just to add something on seeing the market continue to grow and fit the needs of cities. One thing that we hear a lot is just waiting for that electric pickup truck. So, once those kinds of options are available, we'll really continue to see this take off in fleets.
Very cool. Thank you, Sarah. Mike, what are your closing thoughts here today?
Really excited. I think the big theme I want to hit on is it's all going to be built on the partnerships that we have. We cities, we're not going to do this alone. Absolutely not. So working with people like Asaf in the private sector, but working with, utilities, other private businesses who are part of this, other government entities, nonprofits. There's so much that needs to be done, but I think we all are getting better and more innovative in how we work together to bring all the dynamic change we need to bring to get the EV numbers where they need to be.
Very cool. Thank you, Mike. Catherine, what are your closing thoughts on cities with electric vehicles today?
Yeah, I think the future of cities is electric, but I'm most excited to continue seeing the intersection between not only sustainability, environmental issues and social issues, but electrification and equity, same thing, right? So the example that Mike gave us with the CARES funding going into low-income communities, I am most hopeful for the shift, the potential shift to come and how we're thinking about electrification and how we connect it directly back to those communities that need it the most.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thank you very much for closing up there, Catherine. I want to thank everyone here today for their amazing expertise in the electric vehicle space. And what a great way to celebrate World EV today. And I think there's so much insight on the way we can move forward and what we can do in the future. So thank you to Asaf. Thank you to Erica. Again, thank you to Sarah. Thanks again, Mike. And thanks, Catherine. It's been great to have you here today. And what a great discussion we had.